The call he doesn't answer. Len Mercer sat in the car with the engine running and the clinic entrance in front of him. The glass doors opened, then closed. A woman in pink scrubs stepped out holding a paper cup, took a sip, and went back in. Through the tinted windows, he could make out rows of chairs, a front desk, people bent over clipboards. Old people, mostly. Or maybe not old. Maybe that was just how a medical waiting room worked on a Tuesday morning. It made everybody look already halfway translated into patienthood. His phone buzzed once in the cup holder, a calendar reminder he had ignored twice already. Annual wellness visit, 10:40 a.m. A man with a cane was working his way carefully from the handicapped parking space toward the automatic doors. Not slow exactly. Determined slow. The kind that made everybody around him step aside and pretend not to watch. Len shifted the car into reverse. The tires rolled back over a patch of loose gravel. For a second, he thought the man with the cane might look over, might catch him in the act of leaving, but he didn't. Nobody did. The car turned cleanly out of the space. Len kept his eyes on the rearview mirror until the building was behind him. At the light, he told himself he would reschedule. Not today. Not with no sleep last night, not with that waiting room, not with the receptionist asking him to confirm his address and emergency contact in a voice too cheerful for what the building was for. He would do it later, when he felt less cornered by it. The light changed. He drove home. 3 weeks earlier, before he had an appointment to flee, the thing that changed the color of the day was small enough to fit on a square of toilet paper. A thin streak, no bigger than if he'd nicked himself shaving. He stared at it in the bathroom's gray morning light while the coffee maker clicked in the kitchen. For a moment, he did not think much of anything at all. Then the mind arrived behind the eyes and began its work. Sorting, minimizing, adjusting. It was probably nothing. At 71, the body came up with little disturbances. That was how it stayed in the conversation. A pain that moved around. A muscle that complained for no reason. Skin that marked more easily than it used to. There was no law saying every new thing had to mean catastrophe. Len folded the toilet paper over once, then again, and dropped it into the bowl. He flushed before he stood up, as if speed might help make the sight feel less official. The bathroom smelled faintly of shaving cream, and the lemon hand soap he had been buying ever since June found it one year and said, "At least this one smells like somebody actually cleaned something." June had been dead 5 years. Still, the soap remained. He washed his hands and looked at himself in the mirror. Leonard Mercer. Len to everybody who'd known him longer than 10 minutes. 71. Widower. Retired from a job in municipal water management that had required punctuality, plain shirts, and the ability to stay calm while other people panicked about problems underground. He lived alone now in a quiet house in a Tucson subdivision where the streets curved gently and the gravel yards all seemed to be making the same bargain with the desert. His daughter, Ellen, lived across town with a busy life and the habit of checking on him in ways he appreciated only when he was not feeling checked on. He did not think of himself as fragile. He did not think of himself as a man who needed watching. Nothing in the mirror argued otherwise. His hair had thinned, yes. His neck had gone looser. But his face still looked competent. Capable. Like a man who knew which drawer held the batteries and how to reset the sprinkler timer and when to change the air filter, without writing it down. He turned off the bathroom light and went to pour his coffee. The house was tidy in the particular way of somebody who had lived alone long enough to stop calling it tidy. It was just how things were. The dish towel folded over the oven handle. The mail stacked by the fruit bowl. The remote aligned squarely with the edge of the coffee table. There were no decorative accidents anymore. No cardigan left on the back of a chair. No pair of reading glasses migrating from room to room. No second mug in the sink from someone who preferred tea after dinner. Order had outlived companionship here and settled into the walls. Len took his coffee to the kitchen table and sat facing the sliding glass door. The backyard held its usual arrangement. Gravel, low wall, 2 shrubs that survived more from stubbornness than care, and a patio chair going pale on one arm from the sun. Nothing had changed out there. A mourning dove landed on the wall, looked around as if evaluating the property, then flew off. He drank, waited. It was not pain that bothered him. Not really. It was the feeling that his body had spoken in a tone he did not like and might speak again. He told himself not to be ridiculous. By 9:30, he had almost succeeded. He showered, shaved, dressed, and made a point of doing everything in the usual order. Underwear, undershirt, khakis, belt, watch. He even wiped the bathroom sink after himself, though there was hardly anything on it. Routine was a kind of reply. Routine said, "Still normal, still mine." Then he went back to the bathroom to check. Nothing. He stood there longer than necessary anyway, feeling mildly foolish and not at all reassured. He decided to go to the grocery store. There were things he actually needed: turkey, coffee filters, paper towels, and things he did not need but could plausibly buy if he wanted the outing to look less deliberate. Bananas, soup, something frozen. In the garage, the heat met him early. Arizona did that. Even on days that would later become dry and blinding, the morning carried a brief false civility before the sun settled into its real work. Len backed the car out carefully, one hand at the top of the wheel. At the store, he took a small cart and moved through produce, dairy, canned goods. He noticed old habits June had once mocked gently in him. Checking dates on everything. Reaching for the item behind the first one. Refusing bruised fruit as if that were a point of moral principle. He could hear her saying, "Len, it's a banana, not a used car." That memory came so cleanly that he almost smiled. Then it went, and he was just a man in the produce aisle, holding 2 bananas and listening, again, for something inside himself. He hated that, the listening. Not because it was difficult, because it was degrading in a way he could not fully explain, even to himself. It turned the body from background into authority. It made a man submit attention where he had once granted none. He moved on. At the back of the store, in front of the frozen cases, the air changed sharply. Cold leaked into his sleeves and up his neck. He opened the door for peas and left it open a second too long, staring past the bag in his hand at rows of boxed dinners, frozen vegetables, ice cream. The hard little practical future of food waiting to be eaten later. He had not realized until that moment how much his mind had already moved ahead of him. The dates on the boxes, the thought of weeks, the quiet, shameful math of whether one should buy in quantities meant for an ordinary continuation of life. Would he be here to use all of it? The thought came without drama. That made it worse. He closed the freezer door. A woman beside him, maybe in her early 60s, reached in for a bag of hash browns. "They keep this aisle like a morgue," she said. Len gave a polite huff through his nose. She glanced at him, smiling faintly, and then moved on. No conversation, no burden. Just the ordinary passing contact between strangers. Still, he was absurdly grateful she had spoken, because for one second, it had returned the scene to the scale of a grocery store instead of whatever his mind had made of it. His phone rang while he was loading bags into the trunk. Ellen. He looked at the screen and answered a shade too fast. "Hi." "Hi, Dad." Her voice had that efficient brightness it took on when she was in the middle of work. "Bad time?" "No, I'm at the store." "Which means yes, but not yes enough for you to say yes." He shut the trunk. "I'm surviving it." Ellen laughed softly. 42, divorced, working too much at a job that seemed to involve deadlines stacked inside other deadlines. She had inherited June's steadiness, but not her softness. She loved him. He knew that. She also had a way of caring that sometimes felt less like concern and more like somebody reaching for the wheel while claiming they were only pointing at the road. "How's your day?" she asked. "Exciting." "Bought peas." That's the update I was hoping for. He started the car but stayed in park. "How about you?" "Meetings, email, the usual." A pause, then more casually. "Did you ever call the clinic back?" There it was. He looked out at the row of parked cars wavering in the heat. "About what?" "Dad." "What clinic?" "The one that called about your annual. Unless you've secretly become popular with medical offices." "I've been meaning to." "You said that last week." "I know what I said." Another pause. He could picture her pinching the bridge of her nose the way she did when people at work made things harder than they needed to be. "You're due, aren't you?" she said. "Everybody's due for something. That's not an answer." He shifted the phone to his other ear. "Why are we doing this in a parking lot?" "Because if I wait till later, you'll say you're eating dinner, or watching the news, or you're tired, or you just sat down." "I do occasionally sit down, yes." "Dad." He heard the warning note now, not anger, pressure held in check. He softened his voice a little, not because he felt softer, but because he knew the conversation was already narrowing. "I'll call them." "When?" "Soon." "That means nothing." "It means I'll call them. You've been saying that for days." He gripped the steering wheel. "Ellen." And that was enough. Not because she was convinced, because she knew the line in his voice that meant any more pushing would force him deeper into the very thing she was trying to move him out of. "All right," she said. "Just don't let it slide." "It's not sliding." She let that pass too. "Okay, drive safe." "Always do." After the call ended, he sat for a moment with the phone on his thigh, annoyed at her for asking and annoyed at himself for sounding like a man who needed to be asked. Back home, he unloaded the groceries and put everything away with unnecessary precision. The peas in the freezer, turkey in the meat drawer, paper towels under the sink. He refolded the dish rag under there because it had slumped against the cleaning spray. Then he stood up too fast and felt the brief, dull sway of blood pressure catching up. He waited it out with one hand on the counter. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth naming. Still, he checked again in the bathroom. There it was this time too. Less, maybe, or more. Hard to tell. Enough that he knew he had not imagined the morning. He stood very still. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. A dog barked somewhere 2 houses over, then barked again. The sound came thin through the stucco and heat. Len folded the toilet paper and flushed it away. By afternoon, he had fallen into the kind of day people would describe afterward as perfectly normal if they were trying not to look too closely. He tightened the loose screw on a cabinet hinge. He wiped fingerprints from the refrigerator door. He changed the batteries in the TV remote before they died. He stood in the hallway and tried to remember why he had walked there. What had changed was not the house or the day. What had changed was the way his attention now circled back again and again to the same place. The body had become a source of information he did not want and could not stop monitoring. Toward evening, he took a package of ground turkey from the fridge and started dinner. The kitchen window over the sink reflected the room back at him, now that the sun had shifted. His own outline floated over the darkening backyard. He browned the meat, chopped onion, added garlic. The radio sat low on the counter, half static, half news. He used to cook beside June in this kitchen. Not as an equal, as a helper who liked the choreography of being told what came next. She had remembered appointments the same way she remembered to thaw things before noon and rotate the mattress every season and put birthday cards in the mail before they became late. Not controlling, just built for continuity. The practical keeper of onward movement. He could see her in a memory so brief it barely qualified as one. Standing by the phone with a pen, saying, "Thursday at 11. Don't make me be the only adult in this marriage." He had laughed then. Now the memory landed without the laugh. His phone buzzed on the counter while the turkey simmered. Unknown local number. He looked at it and let it ring. The message notification appeared almost immediately after. He turned the stove down first, then washed the knife he had used for the onion, then dried his hands. Only then did he pick up the phone and listen. "Hello, Mr. Mercer. This is Alicia from Desert Valley Internal Medicine. We're calling because you're due for your annual wellness visit. If you'd like to schedule, please give us a call back at He stopped the message before the number ended. The kitchen seemed to hold itself still around him. The ticking wall clock. The soft simmer on the stove. A car passing outside. Call back, he thought. Not because Ellen had told him to, not because the clinic had called twice now. Because this was how adults handled things. You noticed something, you got it checked. You did not stand in your own kitchen like a superstitious man convinced that speaking first would make the bad thing more real. But underneath that thought was another one, quieter and heavier. If he called, the thing would move from private suspicion into shared fact, a chart, a question, a doctor's face performing the neutral kindness doctors learned when they were about to open a door you did not want opened. Even if it turned out to be nothing, he would still have crossed into that system of waiting rooms and follow-ups and tests, ordered for caution's sake. And if it was not nothing, he set the phone down on the counter, picked it up again. He could call now, get voicemail, leave a message. Easy, clean, 1 minute of discomfort, maybe less. Instead, he stood there listening to the saucepan bubble softly and looking at his own blurred reflection in the black window above the sink. Then, with his thumb still resting against the edge of the phone, he turned it face down. That was all. A small act, not heroic, not dramatic, barely even visible. But once he had done it, the room changed around him. The phone was still there. The clinic still existed. The blood would still mean whatever it meant tomorrow. Yet something had shifted. He had made the first clear choice in relation to it, and the choice was delay. Len put both hands on the counter and lowered his head for a second, as if he were only tired. When he straightened, he left the phone where it was, dark against the laminate, and went back to stirring dinner. Private rituals. Len stood in the bathroom in his undershirt and shorts, one hand braced lightly against the sink, studying himself in the mirror, as if the right angle might produce an answer. The overhead light was too honest for that hour. It flattened his face, deepened the hollows beneath his eyes, picked out the loose skin beginning at his neck, and the faint red marks his waistband left behind now. He turned a little to one side, then back, pressed 2 fingers low against his abdomen, waited. Nothing dramatic, nothing he could point to and say there. Just a tenderness that may have been real or may have come from the fact that he was pressing hard enough to make anything feel tender. He let go and looked at his own hand in the mirror, as if it had done something mildly embarrassing. The house was still mostly dark behind him. Morning had only begun to gather at the edges of the blinds. Somewhere down the street, a garage door groaned open. Then silence again. The kind of Tucson quiet that always felt temporary, waiting for leaf blowers and traffic and the day's heat to get organized. On the counter beside the sink sat his reading glasses, the small spiral notepad he had brought in from the kitchen, and a pen from Desert Valley Internal Medicine that he'd somehow acquired years ago and never thrown away. He looked at the pen and then away from it. This was not panic. That was the important thing. He was not one of those people who rushed to the doctor because of one odd symptom and came home with a folder of printouts and instructions to reduce stress. He was being methodical, taking stock, giving it time to declare itself or go away. A week, he decided. That was reasonable, more than reasonable. If it was still happening next week, then maybe he would call. If it stopped, then it had been what most things turned out to be, temporary, irritating, not worth the machinery of a medical office. He reached for the notepad and wrote in careful block letters, Monday, 6:12 a.m., mild soreness. Slight dizziness standing up. He stared at the words after he wrote them. They looked fussy, not like him, like the beginning of a man keeping records because he no longer trusted his own body to speak plainly. He shut the notepad and carried it back to the bedroom. The bedroom still held traces of a shared life without truly feeling shared anymore. June's dresser was gone. Her side of the closet had become winter blankets, a suitcase, old photo boxes. But the shape of the room had never fully relearned itself. There was still the empty half of the headboard, the lamp no one switched on, the patch of carpet where her reading chair had once sat before Ellen insisted it should go because keeping it there was only making things harder. Len had not argued at the time. He was tired of people deciding which forms of attachment counted as healthy. He dressed slowly. Khakis, belt, blue polo. He sat to put on his socks, then stood, then sat again because standing too quickly had sent that same brief float through his head. Not quite a spin, not enough to call dizziness unless a doctor was asking, but enough to make him still for a second. He waited for the room to settle. At breakfast, he made toast and then left it untouched on the plate while the coffee cooled beside it. He wanted to see whether eating made anything worse or better. He was not sure which result would have been more useful. The body felt too much like a machine giving off obscure signals, and he had somehow become the unlucky man assigned to interpret them. He checked the clock above the stove, then the microwave clock, then the one on his phone. He wrote another note. 7:03, no food yet. That looked worse somehow. Not more serious, just more strange. Less like tracking and more like behavior. He turned the notepad face down on the table and finally took a sip of coffee. By mid-morning, he was in the garage, partly because he had gone out there to look for a screwdriver, and partly because the garage offered a version of usefulness that the house did not. The garage smelled of dust, cardboard, motor oil that had leaked years ago and never fully left the concrete. The shelves along one wall were arranged with a care nobody but him would have noticed. Paint cans with dried rims, labeled bins of screws and washers, extension cords looped neatly over hooks, a tackle box he had not opened in 3 summers. He stood in front of the workbench longer than necessary, trying to remember why he had come out. The screwdriver, right. He found it under a stack of sandpaper and carried it back inside, then set it on the kitchen counter without using it. A little later, he found himself in the bathroom again. Then again, by noon the day had acquired a structure he would not have admitted to anyone. Check, wait, record, ignore. Drift to something else, check again, stand still and listen inward. Make a rule, adjust the rule, pretend there was no rule. When the phone rang, he flinched slightly, annoyed enough to answer without looking at the screen. Hello? Len. Martin Hale's voice always sounded like it had already been in the middle of a conversation before he got on the line. Dry, impatient, faintly amused at the whole business of talking. They had known each other long enough that greetings had become optional. Morning, Len said. It's nearly noon. Then good afternoon. That's better. Len leaned against the counter, staring out toward the backyard. Martin was 74, a few years older, but somehow built of quicker parts. Narrow as a fence post, always in motion. Always wearing some old baseball cap with a sweat-dark band above the brim. He had the kind of face that had never learned how to soften itself for politeness. They had met 15 years ago over a neighborhood dispute about irrigation runoff and stayed friends in the way older men sometimes did. Without declarations, without much maintenance. Held together by habit, insult, and the comfort of shared skepticism. "You going to Jensen's today?" Martin asked. "The hardware store? There another one? I wasn't planning on it." "Well, now you are. I need a new latch for the side gate, and I'm not driving across town for the privilege of buying the wrong size." Len almost said no. The word rose naturally. But the idea of staying inside with the notepad in the bathroom and the afternoon stretching ahead of him felt worse. "What time?" "Half hour. That's not a lot of notice. You're retired." So are you." "Exactly. Wear something respectable. They let anybody in there now." Martin hung up before Len could answer. Len stood a moment with the phone still in his hand. Then he set it down and looked at the toast he had never eaten. The coffee had gone cold. He did not write any of that down. Before leaving, though, he opened his browser and typed in a symptom with one finger, deleting and retyping twice because the phrasing itself felt incriminating. "Blood and stool older man causes." He scanned the first page too fast. Hemorrhoids, ulcers, polyps, cancer. The words sat on the screen with the flat authority of print, all categories, no mercy. He clicked one result, read 3 lines, then exited out so quickly it was like hiding something from another person in the room. He closed the browser, opened it again 10 seconds later, searched a different phrasing. When to worry about rectal bleeding? He hated the language of it. Worry, bleeding. It made him sound like a man in an online forum. A man no longer living inside his life, but beside it, documenting decline with strangers. He shut the phone off entirely and slid it into his pocket. The drive to Jensen's took 12 minutes. The sun had climbed into full Arizona confidence by then, white and hard on windshields and stucco, flattening every color in the parking lot except the blue of handicap signs and the yellow-painted curbs. Len parked 2 rows out, where there was more room to open the door. Inside, the store smelled faintly of cut wood, fertilizer, rubber hose. A radio somewhere near plumbing supplies was playing classic rock too quietly to commit. Martin stood by the entrance with a small cart and his usual faded Padres cap, one hand hooked in his belt loop. "You look thrilled," Martin said. "You always say charming things first." Martin turned the cart around. "Keeps expectations low." They moved through the aisles without much hurry. Martin held up packages of gate latches and rejected them one by one with irritated little snorts. Too cheap, too flimsy, wrong screws. Made in places he distrusted on principle. Len followed, listening only halfway, his attention snagging every so often on the same inward question it had followed all morning. A warm, hollow sensation crossed him near the electrical aisle. Not pain, not exactly, just a sudden drop in steadiness, as though the floor had changed materials under him. He stopped for a second by a display of extension cords. Martin kept talking, and I told him, if you're going to build a pergola, at least build one that survives a monsoon. Otherwise, it's just expensive shade with ambitions. Len nodded, though he had not caught most of it. "You hearing me?" Martin said. Unfortunately, yes. Martin gave him a sideways look but kept moving. Near the back of the store, Len bent to lift a small box of wood screws Martin had dropped near the shelf. The motion itself was ordinary. He had bent that far 1,000 times. But when he straightened, the world tipped very slightly, and then righted itself so fast he almost doubted it had happened. Almost. One hand went out and landed against the metal rack. Martin turned at once. "You all right?" "Fine. You don't look fine." I bent down too fast. Martin took the box from him, then stopped trying to break records. Len let out a quick laugh, too quick, already moving past it. "I'm standing, aren't I?" Martin did not answer right away. He put the screws in the cart and looked at Len with a focus that made the fluorescent lights seem harsher. This was the trouble with old friends. They had too much reference material. Martin had known him before June died, before retirement, before the house went so quiet. He knew what Len looked like when he was tired, irritated, bored, angry. He knew the ordinary versions, which meant he was harder to fool with a counterfeit. They went on to plumbing and then paint. Martin found the latch he wanted and 2 other things he had not intended to buy. At checkout, he complained to the cashier about self-checkout kiosks, as if it were still a fresh social problem. The young woman smiled with the resilient blankness of someone paid to survive other people's opinions. Outside, heat hit them like an opened oven. Martin loaded his bag into the passenger seat of his truck, then turned back before getting in. "You eaten today?" Len frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind with an answer." "Yes." "What?" "Food." Martin waited. "Toast," Len said. Martin stared at him another second. "That all?" It's new, not the Oregon Trail. That wasn't my point. Len unlocked his car. Then I missed your point. Martin came a little closer, not dramatic about it, just enough to make leaving feel rude. You've been off all morning. I was dragged to a hardware store by a man who thinks shopping for a gate latch is a group activity. I'm serious. So am I. Martin's mouth flattened. He was not a tender man, but he was not careless either. What he did not know how to do was pretend not to notice once he had noticed. You get lightheaded again? Len said nothing, which was answer enough. Martin rubbed the back of his neck, looking out over the parking lot for a moment, as if patience might be parked there, somewhere between the pickups. You should get that looked at. The line landed in the hot air between them without decoration. No speech attached, no lecture, just plain language, which somehow made it more difficult to brush off. Len smiled too fast. Jesus, Martin, I bent over. You steadied yourself on a shelf. I'm 71, so am I close enough to know that's not the same thing? Len opened the driver's door. You want to diagnose me from aisle 12, go ahead. I'm not diagnosing you. Then don't start. Martin's face changed a little, not softer exactly, more tired. All right, he said, and don't be sore at me for having eyes. That shut the conversation down in a different way. Len got into the car and shut the door before he had to answer. On the drive home, he kept both hands on the wheel and the air conditioning too high. Martin's words had lodged in him, not because they were dramatic, but because they had come from outside, a witness. That was what made them dangerous. Private things could still be shaped, argued with, renamed. Once another person saw them, even briefly, they began to stiffen into fact. At home, he went straight to the bathroom before taking off his shoes, then to the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed with the notepad and began writing more neatly than before. 12:48 lightheaded, bending down at Jensen's. Before lunch. Toast only. Martin noticed. He stared at the last two words. Then he crossed out Martin noticed so hard the paper nearly tore. He went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, ate half of it standing up, and left the other half wrapped on the counter. His appetite had narrowed into something practical and suspicious. Food was no longer just food, it was variable, test condition, possible cause. He hated that it had become so quickly useful in the wrong way. In the late afternoon, he sat in the backyard under the patio cover with the notepad beside him and the desert heat pressing down on the block wall. A plane moved slowly overhead. Somewhere, a sprinkler hissed and clicked. He tried to read an article in the paper and found himself rereading the same paragraph 4 times. By evening, the notepad had gained 3 more entries. 3:10 mild soreness. 5:42 bathroom, small amount, hard to tell. 7:05 little dizzy standing from chair. He did not like the question mark. It made him sound uncertain, which he was. But he disliked false certainty more. Dinner was soup from a can. He told himself it was because he wanted something easy. The truth was he wanted something mild, something less likely to complicate the experiment he had apparently turned himself into. After washing the bowl, he went to the bedroom and changed into a t-shirt. The house had that thin nighttime silence that came after television sets went on in neighboring homes and before people began turning in. Len sat on the side of the bed with his phone in his hand. He opened the browser again. This time he typed, "Dizziness, bending over, older adult dehydration are serious." He read, closed the page, opened another. "Cannot eating cause dizziness, elderly?" He hated elderly most of all. It was the kind of word other people used when speaking to one another across the top of your head. He set the phone down on the nightstand and switched off the lamp. Darkness took the room in sections. A minute later, he turned the lamp back on, picked up the phone, and searched again. The same symptoms. Different wording. Same answers assembling themselves in slightly different order, as if one phrasing might yield a version of reality more favorable than the others. When he finally put the phone down, it was face up, its screen black and ready. Len lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling fan not moving. After a while, he reached out once more, brought the phone close to his face in the dim room, and typed the same symptom for the 3rd time that night. Love feels like surveillance. The knock came just as Len was sliding the unopened clinic envelope under a stack of grocery ads on the kitchen counter. He stopped with his hand still on the paper. The knock came again, sharper this time, followed by the quick rattle of the screen door. Not a stranger. Somebody who already belonged enough to touch the house before being invited. Len straightened, glanced once at the counter, then crossed the kitchen. Through the narrow pane beside the front door, he saw Ellen standing on the porch with 2 reusable grocery bags hanging from her hands. She had sunglasses pushed up on her head and the look she always wore when she was doing 3 things at once, even standing still. Her eyes moved immediately when he appeared, not just to his face, but past him, into the house, taking in whatever could be taken in from a single angle. He opened the door. "Well," he said, "you planning to break in or just wear out the hardware?" Hi to you too. She lifted one of the bags slightly. I was nearby. You're never nearby. I can still say it. Ellen stepped inside without waiting to be asked twice. She was 42 now, old enough that her face sometimes startled him by resembling June's around the mouth, and then, a second later, looked nothing like her at all. Her hair was pulled back in the efficient loose knot she wore when she did not have time to care how it looked. She smelled faintly of hand lotion and car heat, and the refrigerated air from the grocery store clinging to the paper cartons in the bag. Her love always seemed to arrive carrying something: food, information, instructions, a plan. She set the bags on the kitchen island and gave him a quick one-armed hug that managed to be both affectionate and evaluative. You're warm, she said as she pulled back. It's Tucson. That's not what I meant. Len shut the front door. Then you should mean what you say. She gave him a look that passed quickly but not lightly. I brought stuff. Trader Joe's was on the way back from a client thing. He looked into the bags. Salad mix, soup cartons, yogurt. A loaf of seeded bread he would not have bought for himself because it cost too much and shed little seeds everywhere. Bananas, coffee, things selected by somebody who had built, in her head, an idea of what he should be eating and then acted on it before he had a chance to refuse. You didn't need to do this. I know. That usually stops people. Not when they're related to you. She started unloading the bags. Len stayed where he was a moment too long, watching her move around his kitchen as if she belonged there enough to know where things went. Which, in fairness, she mostly did. The cereal bowls had changed cabinets since last year, but she found the soup pot lid on the first try and opened the pantry without hesitation. The house had been his again after she moved out, and then more deeply his after June died. But every time Ellen came over, some old domestic map reappeared beneath the present one, and he disliked how quickly it made him feel like the secondary resident. I was about to make lunch, he said. She glanced over her shoulder. Were you? Yes. With what? He looked at the counter. There was a mug in the sink, half a newspaper section folded by the toaster, and nothing out to suggest lunch. I hadn't gotten that far. That is not making lunch. It's the beginning of making lunch. Ellen smiled, but her eyes went back to him too quickly. A scan. Face, shoulders, shirt hanging a little looser than before. The old habit of his daughter reading a room and inventorying the damage in the same motion. How have you been sleeping? She asked. He let out a short breath through his nose. That didn't take long. It was a question. It was 3 questions disguised as one. She set a carton of soup on the counter. Fine. How are you sleeping, eating, and feeling? Bossy. I didn't ask how I was. Len moved past her to the refrigerator and opened it, mostly for something to do with his hands. The refrigerator was already full enough for one person. He shifted things around to make room for the yogurt. I'm sleeping fine, he said. She made a small sound that did not rise to disbelief but leaned in that direction. And eating? I eat. Dad? What? What does that mean? It means I continue to take in food on a regular basis. That's not an answer either. He shut the refrigerator more firmly than necessary. I had toast this morning. And coffee. Ellen stopped moving. She did not do the dramatic version of worry. No widened eyes, no hand to the chest. She just got still in a way that made a room suddenly feel too small for whatever was about to be discussed. That's all, she said. It's late breakfast. It's 1:30. I'm aware of clocks. Have you been sick? Len laughed once immediately. From toast? Have you had a cold, a cough, stomach thing, anything? No. Any trouble sleeping? I already answered that. She looked at him a second longer. You look tired. I'm 71. That's one of the available looks. She opened the cabinet for glasses and paused with her hand on the handle, her attention snagging on the counter. The stack of ads. The envelope corner just visible beneath them. Len saw her see it. He moved before he meant to, crossing to the coffee maker and reaching for the empty pot. You want coffee? Ellen did not take the bait. What's that? He kept his back to her. What's what? The envelope. He turned. Mail. From who? He set the coffee pot down. You doing audits now? She stepped closer and slid the grocery ads aside with 2 fingers. Desert Valley Internal Medicine. Their logo in the corner. Windowed envelope, still sealed. Len felt something inside him pull tight and cool. It's just a reminder, he said. Ellen looked at the envelope, then at him. For what? You can read. That's not the point. It's for an annual visit. Okay, she waited. And nothing. And you didn't open it. I know what it is without opening it. That's convenient. Her tone was not sharp yet, which made it worse. Sharpness he could fight. This quieter version made room for facts to stand there on their own. Len picked up the envelope and turned it over once in his hand. The paper felt flimsy, official, irritatingly clean. It's junk until I need it. A doctor's reminder is not junk. It is until you decide to respond. Ellen put both palms on the counter. Did you make the appointment? He opened the envelope then. Right there, because not opening it had suddenly become the more incriminating act. He pulled out the folded sheet and scanned the lines without absorbing them. Date due. Call to schedule. Preventive care language. Numbers, hours. There, he said. Opened. Dad. No, go ahead. You wanted it opened. Now it's open. She let out a breath and leaned back slightly as if giving him more physical room might somehow help. I'm not trying to win a point. That's good. I'm asking a simple thing. He dropped the paper on the counter. And I'm telling you, I'll handle it. You keep saying that. So I don't know if it means anything. There it was, the shift. Small, but unmistakable. Not from concern to accusation exactly. More from trust to verification. The tone people used when they had begun keeping track. Len moved to the sink and rinsed out the coffee pot even though it was already clean. Water struck the metal and splashed his wrist. He kept his eyes on that. Behind him, Ellen said more carefully, Did something happen? No. Then why are you acting like this? He shut off the faucet. Like what? Touchy, defensive, like I'm asking about a body in the garage. He turned too fast and the room tipped just slightly before leveling again. He put the coffee pot down on the counter with deliberate care. I'm acting like a man in his own house, he said. Ellen's face changed, not hurt first, but restraint, as though she had to decide which version of the conversation she could still save. I came by with groceries, and she said when I asked if you were okay. And then you started inspecting the premises. That's not fair. No, she folded her arms and then unfolded them again. You've lost weight. I haven't. You have. I haven't stepped on a scale for your benefit. She ignored that. You look tired. You say you're eating toast for lunch. You have a medical reminder sitting unopened under junk mail. So yes, I'm asking questions. Her voice had gone firmer now, not loud, not dramatic, working voice. The one that expected adults to stay on topic. Len looked past her through the sliding glass door to the backyard. Bright Sunday sun on gravel. The low wall. Heat making the air above it tremble faintly. He wanted suddenly, absurdly, to be outside where there was less furniture holding the conversation in place. I'm fine, he said. Ellen laughed once, quietly, without humor. That's exactly the sentence I don't believe anymore. It landed harder than Martin's comment had. Martin was a witness from outside. Ellen's doubt came from inside the family, from all the years she had known his voice and learned the shades of what it concealed. He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down because standing felt too exposed. You're making a whole production out of nothing. I'm trying not to. Then stop trying. She stared at him for a second, then turned away and took a carton of soup from the counter. I'm going to heat this up, she said. You can be offended while you eat. Len almost told her not to touch his stove. The sentence rose whole and useless, and he let it die before it reached his mouth. Ellen moved around the kitchen with clipped efficiency, unscrewing the soup lid, pouring it into a pot, lighting the burner. Her anger, when it came, always arrived as competence. She did not slam cupboards. She got practical faster. He watched the back of her shoulders. When she was little, she had been all motion and questions, always halfway up something she shouldn't be climbing. June used to say Ellen didn't enter rooms, she assessed them. Even as a child, she had wanted to know what was wrong before the adults had agreed anything was wrong. At 9, she had opened the bathroom cabinet under the sink, looking for Band-Aids, and come back with the expired blood pressure pills June had forgotten to throw out. Why do we still have these? She'd asked, not scared, just offended by negligence. Now that same reflex had a sharper edge because it was turned on him. Any cough? She asked over the stove. Len closed his eyes briefly and no. Night sweats? No. But bathroom issues? He looked at her. She did not turn around. She stirred the soup as if asking about plumbing. Jesus, Ellen. It's a question. It's an invasive question. If the answer is no, then say no. He said nothing. That made her turn. The silence changed the room more than any confession would have. Ellen's hands stopped on the spoon. Her face did not fall apart. It sharpened. Dad? He stood up. I'm going outside. She set the spoon down and switched off the burner. Don't do that. Do what? Make me chase you around your own house. He gave a humorless half smile. Then don't. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ellen took the pot off the stove and carried 2 bowls to the patio table out back, as if she had decided the conversation would continue, but could at least change scenery. Len followed because Refusing that would have felt even more childish than he already did. Outside, the heat pressed close under the covered patio, though a little breeze moved now and then through the side gap by the gate. The plastic webbing on the patio chairs had faded unevenly in the sun. June had once wanted to replace them. Len had said these worked fine. That had been 4 years before she died, and the chairs were still here, faded into stubbornness. Ellen set his bowl down in front of him and sat opposite. She did not pick up her spoon. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said. "That's generous. I mean it." He looked at the soup, tomato, too hot to eat yet. "You have an odd way of showing it." Her mouth tightened. "You are impossible today, and you're here on inspection. I brought you groceries. You brought yourself permission." "Permission for what? To notice you're not okay?" The breeze died. Somewhere nearby a dog barked once and stopped. Len took a spoonful of soup before it had cooled enough, burning his tongue slightly. Good. It gave him something immediate to react to. "I'm tired," he said, "and that's all." "From what?" He looked up. "Life." "That's not an answer either." "No, it's the answer you don't like." Ellen pushed her bowl a few inches away. "Did you go to the doctor?" The directness of it irritated him partly because he admired it. Ellen had always learned faster than people expected. She stopped circling when circling wasted time. "No," he said. "Did you skip an appointment?" He hesitated a fraction too long. Her eyes held on his face. "You did. It was an annual. That's not the same as nothing. I said I'll reschedule." "When?" There was the word again. The demand for a date, a proof, a marker pinned to the fog. He looked toward the yard wall. "Soon." Ellen laughed under her breath and shook her head once. "You really think that works?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "You keep saying soon like it's a real plan. It's just a delay with a tie on." Len's spoon struck the side of the bowl a little too hard. "Don't talk to me like I'm 12. "Then stop making me ask the same question 6 different ways." He stared at her. She stared back. For one long second, he could see the child in her and the woman at once. The daughter who still loved him with her whole body, and the adult who had reached the age where love no longer kept her from being angry. He looked down first. That felt irrationally like losing ground. They ate in a silence that wasn't peace. The soup cooled. A car passed in front of the house. Somewhere farther off, a leaf blower started up, the sound thin and hateful in the dry air. When Ellen finally stood to clear the bowls, she did it without asking. Len let her. Inside, she rinsed dishes at the sink while he stood near the kitchen table with his hands in his pockets, already feeling the house differently. Opened, disturbed, as if drawers had been pulled out and pushed back and slightly wrong. Ellen dried her hands on the dish towel and reached for her purse. "I'm not trying to make this harder," she said. Len said nothing. She looked at him, waiting perhaps for an opening that did not appear. "I know you hate being pushed." "That's one word for it? What word would you use?" He gave a small shrug, interfered with. She nodded once as if she had expected no better answer. "Okay, that should have ended it." It almost did. Then she picked up her phone, thumbed something onto the screen, and slid it into her bag. A second later, Len's phone buzzed on the counter. He did not pick it up until after she'd opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "What's that?" he asked. "A text," she said. "I assumed." She put her sunglasses back on. "Read it after I leave." "Ellen." She paused. His mouth opened on some version of drop it, or I said I'd handle it, or maybe even something better than either of those. Nothing came out that he could live with. "All right," he said finally. She studied him for a second, then nodded and left. The screen door shut, her car started, reversed, pulled away. The house went quiet in layers after that. First the engine sound faded, then the porch creak settled. Then there was only the refrigerator hum and the faint tick of the kitchen clock and the fact of his own breathing in the room. Len picked up the phone. "Text me when you make the appointment." No heart emoji, no softening phrase, no love you, though he knew she did. The message was not cold. That was what made it sting. It was practical. It assumed a future in which she would need confirmation because his word no longer covered the distance by itself. He set the phone down. On the counter, the clinic letter lay where he had left it, unfolded now, too visible. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked it up. The paper was warm from the sun that had hit the countertop. Desert Valley Internal Medicine. Reminder. Schedule. Call us. The language of people who believed things got handled because that was what handling was for. Len held the letter a moment longer than necessary. Then he opened the drawer by the phone, pushed aside the takeout menus and old coupons, and slid the letter underneath them. Not just put away. Deeper than before. Buried where he would still know exactly where it was. He closed the drawer with his fingertips and stood there in his own kitchen, looking at the smooth wood front as though the room had watched him do it. The wrong man to talk to. Martin picked the cafe because it had bad coffee and no atmosphere. That was how he'd put it on the phone. No music loud enough to qualify as assault, he'd said, and nobody under 40 stays longer than it takes to collect a smoothie. Len had almost declined. He had already slept badly, waking twice in the night, and once at 3:13 specifically because he'd set an alarm for 3:13, not to take medicine, not to go anywhere, only to see whether the ache low in his body was still there when the house was at its quietest. When it had been, he'd lain awake afterward with the stupid satisfaction of a man confirming his own private dread. By morning, he was tired enough that saying no should have been easy. But saying no to Martin after the week they'd had would have sounded like what it was. So at 9:30, he parked outside a low stucco strip of shops on Wilmot and sat for a second with both hands on the wheel before getting out. The cafe was narrow and overlit, its windows tinted against the Tucson glare. Inside, the air conditioning ran too cold, and the whole place smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon syrup. A rack of local newspapers leaned crookedly by the door. A woman behind the counter was steaming milk with the calm detachment of somebody who no longer heard the machine. Martin was already there at a two-top near the window, his cap on the chair beside him, black coffee in front of him, reading glasses low on his nose as he stared at the back of a receipt like it might contain tax fraud. He looked up when Len approached. "You're late." "I'm 2 minutes late." "That counts." Len pulled out the chair across from him. "You retired from the railroad, or were you always born scheduling arrivals? I like a world where clocks mean something." Len set his keys on the table. "Then you picked the wrong century." Martin snorted and took off the glasses. He looked older in the morning light than he had at the hardware store. Or maybe not older, just less in motion. The narrowness of him was more visible sitting down, wrists like dowels, jaw sharpened by weight he had never put back on after treatment last year. He still dressed the same, jeans, boots, a faded plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled once at the forearm, but nothing about him suggested fragility unless you had watched closely enough to catch where the energy now ran out. That was the problem with Martin. He had been through enough that he no longer respected denial as a useful social custom. Len went to the counter, ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin he did not want, then carried both back to the table. The coffee was too hot to drink. The muffin sat on the plate with a sugar crust splitting along the top. Martin glanced at it. "That for you?" Len looked down. "I wasn't aware I looked like a muffin thief." "You didn't eat lunch the other day." Len tore open a sugar packet he didn't need and set it down untouched. "You keeping records now, too?" Martin leaned back in his chair. Jesus. The word was flat, not explosive, but it marked something. Around them, the cafe kept doing its ordinary morning business. A college kid in headphones bent over a laptop. A woman in scrubs stood by the cream station, staring into her phone. Ice clattered in a blender. The newspaper rack near the door tipped slightly every time somebody brushed past it. It was the kind of place where nobody expected anything of anyone else except not to take the last clean table and sit there forever. Len liked places like that. Anonymous, mildly disappointing, structurally resistant to intimacy. Martin took a sip of coffee. "You get my message?" "I'm here, aren't I?" I asked if you got the message. "Yes. And what?" Martin gave him a long look. "You want to do this all morning?" Len broke the top off the muffin, though he still didn't want it. Blueberry smell, artificial and sweet, rose in the cold air. "I assumed we were here to drink bad coffee and insult the decor." "The decor can wait." Len chewed and swallowed. The muffin stuck a little in his throat. "You seem lively." Martin rubbed a thumb once along the edge of his cup. "You've got your daughter circling, and you're mad at me for noticing you nearly folded in half at Jensen's." "I did not nearly fold in half. You put your hand on a shelf like it was the only thing keeping you upright." "It was a shelf." Martin didn't blink. "You gone in yet?" Len looked out the window. The parking lot was already white with heat. Cars sat in the sun like something being punished. A woman in a broad straw hat crossed toward the nail salon next door, carrying a potted plant against her hip. "Gone in where?" he said. Martin let out a soft breath through his nose. "Clinic, doctor, one of those places with adults in sensible shoes." Len took a drink of coffee that was still too hot. It burned his tongue, which annoyed him. "Not yet." Martin waited. "I'm thinking about it." "That's not the same thing." Len set the cup down. "You've become very interested in my calendar. You've become very interested in talking around things." There was nothing to say to that wouldn't prove his point, so Len broke off another piece of muffin instead. He could feel Martin watching him. Not kindly exactly, but with the old, unsentimental attention of somebody who had sat beside him in enough ordinary time to know the difference between irritation and evasion. 15 years of it. Barbecues when June was alive. Home improvement disasters. Watching bad Cardinals seasons in Len's living room and worse political coverage at Martin's. Helping each other drag heavy objects neither one should have been lifting alone. Martin had never once treated him gently. That was part of why Len trusted him. Also why, now, he was the wrong man to be sitting across from. Martin stirred nothing into his black coffee, a habit from an earlier era, performing the shape of stirring without actually adding anything. You know what the first useful word was for me? Len looked at him despite himself. What? Biopsy. The word landed strangely in the air of the cafe. Too clinical for the place, too specific. Len felt his shoulders shift before he could stop them. Martin saw that, and went on anyway. Not because I wanted to hear it, because up till then, everything was vague enough for me to keep pretending I was just tired, or getting older, or had lousy lungs from 40 years of pretending filter tips meant anything. Len said nothing. Martin rested his forearms on the table. Then one doctor says biopsy, and you can hate the word all you want, but it at least belongs to a process. Before that, you're just wandering around with your own imagination. Len picked at the paper wrapper on the muffin. You inviting me to coffee or to a seminar? I'm telling you what happened. I know what happened, and I was there for part of it. You were there after they already knew. Martin's voice remained level. That made it worse. No performance, no plea, just sequence. A blender screamed at the counter. Someone laughed too loudly near the door. Len's coffee had cooled enough to drink, but he no longer wanted it. Martin looked past him for a second, then back. You know what I remember most? Len almost said no and leave it there, but the question seemed to demand an answer. What? The waiting room before the follow-up. Not hearing anything yet, just the room. Martin shrugged one shoulder. TV bolted to the wall with subtitles on. A fake ficus and a brass pot. Some poor bastard pretending to read a fishing magazine from 2018. Everybody in there trying not to look like they'd already started bargaining with something. Len looked down at the table. The cafe's surface was faux wood. The grain repeated every 16 inches in a pattern you could only unsee if you made yourself stop noticing it. He traced one knot with his eyes. Martin went on. Then stage, that was the next word. Len's hand tightened once around the paper wrapper. He did not want to hear stage in public, with people eating pastries 3 feet away and a girl calling out someone's oat milk latte at the counter. The indignity of it made him angry before the fear even arrived. Martin was not watching him performatively. He kept his gaze low on the coffee as if this were not confession and not seeking pity. Just placing facts on the table because facts, unlike feelings, had edges. It doesn't sound real the first time, Martin said. Stage, follow-up, oncology. They sound like words for other people. Then they don't. Len set down the crushed muffin wrapper. I didn't ask for this. Martin looked up. No, you asked for coffee. That's right. And I invited you for coffee because if I ask you this standing in a parking lot, you'll walk off again. Len gave a short, joyless laugh. You're very proud of your methods. Martin's mouth tightened, not quite a smile. No, I'm old enough to stop confusing politeness with usefulness. Silence stretched between them. Not empty, crowded. Len looked out the window again. The nail salon door opened and closed. Light flashed off a windshield hard enough to hurt. The woman in scrubs at the next table was now eating half a banana and typing one-handed into her phone. No one in the cafe knew that a man across from him had just said biopsy and stage like setting down nails on a counter. No one cared. That anonymity should have made it easier. Instead, it made the words feel more exposed, not less. He heard himself ask, and you think telling me all this is helpful? Martin gave a dry laugh under his breath. No, helpful's not the right word. Then what is? Necessary. Len stared at him. Martin held the look. You don't need a ghost story. You need somebody to remind you that all this... He made a small motion with 2 fingers, meaning whatever Len had been doing all week. The not calling, the delay, the way he wore fine like a clean shirt, isn't the same as handling it. Len's jaw tightened. You don't know what I'm handling. No, Martin said, because you won't say. I don't owe you a case file. Martin leaned back. You don't owe me anything. Good. But don't pretend that makes you less obvious. Len pushed his coffee aside. You know, this is exactly why people stop telling you things. I know, Martin nodded once. That's happened. The plainness of the answer checked Len for a second. Martin was not winning a point. He was just telling the truth the way he always did, without sugar, without apology, and sometimes without enough regard for what it cost the other person to hear it. That had once felt like a virtue. Today it felt like a crowbar. Martin picked up his cup. I'm not saying you've got what I had. No, Len said. You're just walking me right up to the cliff and pointing. I'm saying there are some doors you don't go around by refusing to turn the knob. Len laughed sharply. You rehearsed that on the drive over? Martin ignored the shot. Not knowing isn't the same as being fine. There it was. Not loud, not delivered, just spoken. That made it hit harder than if Martin had raised his voice. Len felt the words enter him like something cold. Not because they were profound, because they were maddeningly plain. A sentence built from small, sturdy pieces, nothing in it to argue with except the man saying it. He stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the tile. At the counter, the barista glanced up. Martin didn't move. Sit down. No. Len, you don't get to do this. Do what exactly? This. Len gestured once, uselessly, encompassing the coffee shop, the words, the week, Martin's face, his own body, all of it. Act like because something happened to you. Now you're appointed. Martin's expression changed, not wounded, which would have been easier to bear. Just tired. That's not what I'm doing. It's exactly what you're doing. Then go home angry, Martin said. But don't rewrite me into a villain because you don't like the subject. The sentence sent heat straight up Len's neck. He reached for his keys. You should have kept this to yourself. Martin looked at him a long moment, then nodded once. Maybe. Len waited for more. None came. That almost made him stay. Almost. But staying now would require one of two humiliations, either softening or escalating. He wanted neither. He turned and walked out. The heat outside hit him full in the face. Tucson at 10 in the morning, already moving toward its punishing version of daylight. The parking lot smelled of hot tar and stale car exhaust. Len kept walking until he reached his car, opened the door, then stood there with one hand on the frame because the lightheadedness came not from bending this time, but from standing too quickly and carrying too much anger in a body that had become treacherous in small ways. He waited it out. Behind him, the cafe door opened, closed. He did not turn to see if Martin had followed. He knew Martin well enough to know he wouldn't. Martin wasn't the chasing kind. He'd say the thing, let it land where it landed, and leave the rest to a person's own pride. Len got into the car and shut the door hard enough to make the rearview mirror tremble. He drove home taking the side streets, as if longer streets would somehow extend the conversation. At a red light, he realized his hands were gripping the wheel so tightly the veins stood out across the backs of them. He loosened them one finger at a time. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the anger had not gone. It had only changed shape, less clean, more mixed. Anger at Martin, yes. Also anger at the fact that Martin had supplied pictures now, where before there had only been fog. Waiting room, follow-up, stage, the fake plant, the fishing magazine, a whole architecture of process. Inside the house, the cool air felt stale. He set his keys in the bowl by the wall and stood in the kitchen without moving farther. The phone on the counter stayed dark. Ellen had not texted again. The clinic letter remained in the drawer where he had shoved it, but now the drawer itself seemed to give off a kind of presence, as if paper could press outward through wood if looked at hard enough. He went to the hall closet first, then turned away from it. Wrong place. Then to the desk in the den. The den had become a room of postponed paperwork since June died. Not a disaster. He would never allow that. But stacks existed now where once there had been files. Insurance renewal notices, tax envelopes, manuals for appliances that no longer worked, greeting cards saved for reasons he would not have been able to defend. June had organized life into labeled tabs and folders. Len had inherited the materials without the faith. He knelt by the bottom drawer and pulled it open. Insurance. The file was there under home warranty papers and an old spiral-bound booklet for Medicare supplemental coverage. He took out the folder and carried it to the desk, then sat. The pages inside made that dry, clean sound paper made when it believed it contained the important version of your life. Premiums, deductibles, network information, coverage summaries in polite blueprint. A card slipped into a plastic sleeve. Numbers to call. Instructions about claims and authorizations. The whole bureaucratic grammar of what happened after a thing got named. Len opened one sheet, read the first paragraph, and absorbed nothing. He sat there instead, holding the stack and looking at it for a long time, while the den gathered around him in afternoon silence. Later after dark, he set an alarm for 2 a.m. Not because he had somewhere to be, only to wake and find out whether the ache was still there. The week he thought he got better. It began with 2 decent mornings in a row. That was all. No revelation, no clean break. just the absence of certain things. Len woke on Tuesday and found that the ache low in his body had receded to something small enough to ignore if he kept moving. He stood up from the bed and waited for the room to tilt. It didn't. He went to the bathroom with the wary attention of someone checking whether a trap had been reset, and found nothing new alarming enough to ruin the day before coffee. By noon, he had already started converting improvement into meaning. Not a lot of meaning. He did not let himself get grand with it. He was too old for optimism that wore bright colors. But the body's silence had a persuasive force of its own. A few quieter days, and all the words Martin had brought to the cafe, biopsy, follow-up, stage, began to look theatrical, imported from another man's life and pressed too hard against his. People had spells, he told himself. Minor things flared and then settled. The body was not a courtroom transcript. It did not testify the same way twice. On Wednesday, he ate cereal and a banana and then, almost because the act pleased him, made himself eggs around 11. The smell of butter in the skillet felt like a return to something. Not June, exactly. He had learned by now that ordinary domestic steadiness did not come back just because he made a hot lunch. But it was near enough to one of the old shapes that he stood at the stove longer than necessary after turning off the burner. He finished the eggs, all of them. Later that afternoon, he opened the refrigerator and did the kind of private accounting he had not realized he had stopped doing. Yogurt running low, half a carton of milk, lettuce nearly gone. The kind of inventory that assumed next week existed in ordinary, usable form. He drove to the grocery store and bought things without studying the dates like a man taking inventory of his own remaining time. Turkey, rice, a jar of pasta sauce, frozen green beans, English muffins. At the end of the aisle, he doubled back for coffee because the canister at home was light and because buying coffee felt like the kind of small, dull commitment people made when they expected mornings to keep arriving. At checkout, he added a bag of clementines he had not planned on. Outside, in the parking lot heat, he loaded the bags into the trunk and felt a sudden, almost shameful gratitude toward the day, toward whatever anonymous function of flesh and blood and chance had decided to let him off, or at least let up. He did not call the clinic. He thought about it once while putting away groceries, then again while rinsing the rice pot after dinner. Each time the same argument arrived dressed as reason. Why rush into a machine built to enlarge minor problems into appointments, referrals, scans, all because he had had a bad week? If things were easing, it made more sense to watch a little longer. Confirm the pattern. Spare everyone the trouble. That included Ellen, especially Ellen. She texted him Thursday afternoon. Dinner Sunday? I can come over or we can go out. Your pick. Len stood at the kitchen counter with the phone in his hand. Through the window above the sink, the late light had gone soft enough to flatter the backyard for a few minutes. Even the gravel looked warm instead of dry. He knew what the invitation meant. Not just dinner, a check-in. A chance for her to confirm or revise what she thought she knew. He could have refused. He nearly did. Then he pictured her receiving another vague answer from him, another maybe later, another week of suspicion building under practical concern. And underneath that, though he would not have called it this even in his own head, was something close to relief, wanting to be witnessed. Not announced, just seen. Look, you worried too much. Look, I'm still here in the ordinary way. He typed back. Out is fine, somewhere quiet. Her reply came almost immediately. I know a place. 6? 6 works. He set the phone down and stood there a moment longer than the exchange required. The kitchen seemed larger for a second. Or maybe only less under surveillance. Friday and Saturday held enough ordinary hours to strengthen the lie. He slept better Friday night. Not well, but better. On Saturday morning, he cleaned the patio table, watered the shrubs, and changed the batteries in the hall thermostat without sitting down halfway through the job. He found himself humming once, some half-remembered radio song from decades ago, and stopped at once, as if he had caught himself behaving with too much confidence. In the bathroom mirror, he looked less gaunt to his own eyes, though he knew that might only be mood. The face looking back remained the same, thinning gray hair, deepening lines at the mouth, the slight downward drag at the corners that had set in after June died and never fully lifted. Still, he shaved more carefully that morning. Put on a clean polo instead of the older one he used for errands. He chose the watch June had given him on their 30th anniversary, the one with the plain silver face and dark leather band, though he had nowhere in particular to be until Sunday. He did not think of it as courting luck. He thought of it as resuming. Sunday evening, he drove to the restaurant Ellen had picked, a quiet Italian place tucked into a shopping center off Campbell. Nothing fancy. White tablecloths, but paper-wrapped breadsticks in a basket by the host stand. Soft yellow light. A bar television muted above the bottles. The sort of place where retired couples split entrees and waiters spoke just loudly enough to sound attentive. Ellen was already there when he came in, seated in a booth near the back. She stood halfway as he approached, smiling in a way that was careful but real. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She hugged him briefly. Her hair was down tonight instead of pulled back, and she wore a dark green blouse under a cardigan the color of oatmeal. She looked tired around the eyes in the familiar modern way of competent adults with too much to do, but not tense. Not the way she had been in his kitchen. She seemed, if not relaxed, then willing to be. That felt like grace and also like pressure. "You found it okay?" she asked. "I've been driving in Tucson longer than the city's been this overbuilt." "That's not an answer." "It's close enough." She smiled and slid back into the booth. He sat across from her. The waiter came by, poured water, asked if they wanted anything to drink. Ellen ordered iced tea. Len almost said coffee out of habit, then chose iced tea too, as if the duplication might spare him having to decide something else. For the first few minutes, they talked around safer subjects. Ellen's work, a client who kept changing direction and then acting surprised about invoices. The road construction near Grant, Martin's old truck, which Len had seen parked outside the hardware store again and remarked, still held together by rust and spite. Ellen laughed at that. "He texted me, you know." Len looked up from the menu. She said it casually, but not accidentally. "Last week, just asked if I'd heard from you." The waiter appeared, taking their order before Len had fully chosen. Lasagna for Ellen, chicken piccata for him, salad to split. When the waiter left, Len said, "Martin should mind his own business." Ellen tore the paper wrapper from a breadstick. "I don't think he sees it that way." "He rarely does." He was worried. He likes the sound of his own concern. Ellen looked at him. Then, to his surprise, she let it go. "Well," she said, "I'm not taking attendance on your allies." He almost smiled. The salad came. They shared it. She told him a story about a neighbor whose teenage son had tried to fix a garbage disposal with the power still on and ended up throwing a circuit breaker for half the townhouse complex. Len told her about a man at Safeway who had insisted on paying with a check and then couldn't remember how to spell his own street name under pressure. Ellen laughed hard enough that she had to cover her mouth. For stretches of the evening, it became possible to forget the structure underneath it. Not completely. Len could still feel her looking from time to time, at his hands when he reached for water, at how much he ate, at the speed of it. But the looking had softened. It had given up the sharp edges of inquiry. Maybe because he was eating. Maybe because he was talking more like himself. Maybe because she wanted, as badly as he did, for worry to turn out to have been a temporary overcorrection. Their entrees arrived. The chicken was hotter than he expected, bright with lemon and capers. He ate more than half of it. Ellen noticed he saw that too. Noted it, filed it, relaxed another degree. "You seem better," she said eventually, not as a question. He dabbed his mouth with the napkin. "I told you I was fine." "That's not exactly the same thing." "No," he said, "but it can overlap." She gave him a look that was close enough to amused that he felt something in his chest loosen. "Are you sleeping any better?" she asked. "Some. Eating?" He lifted his fork. "You're watching it happen." "I am." "Yes." "Then take the win." That got a real smile from her, quick and unguarded enough that for a moment she looked younger, closer to the Ellen who used to come home from school talking too fast, toss her backpack on the floor, and eat leftovers cold out of the fridge before June could object. "I'm happy to," she said. There was no accusation in it, no trap. That made the next lie easier and worse. When the waiter came to ask about dessert, Len said no before Ellen could even consider the menu. They walked out into the parking lot under a warm Sunday night sky, the heat finally easing off the pavement. Somewhere nearby, somebody had watered a patch of landscaping, and the air carried that desert smell of damp dust, rising briefly before vanishing. At Ellen's car, she touched his arm lightly. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Thank you for the cross-examination over pasta." She rolled her eyes. "You'd know a real cross-examination." "I mean it, it was good." He nodded. She seemed on the verge of adding something else, then didn't. "Drive safe," she said instead. "You too." He watched her pull out before going to his own car. Not because he didn't trust himself to drive, but because the evening had left behind a curious tenderness he did not quite know what to do with. A false softening, though he would not have named it that. Just the relief of having passed temporarily as himself. At home, the house felt less accusing than it had all week. He left the kitchen light on while he changed into a t-shirt. He put a glass of water on the nightstand. He even thought briefly of throwing out the notepad where he'd been recording symptoms, as if the act itself had become an embarrassment now that the crisis was evidently receding. He didn't. He shoved it farther back in the drawer instead. Around midnight, he woke with the dry need to use the bathroom. Nothing in the room felt wrong at first. The house lay around him in familiar dark shapes. Dresser, lamp, the pale rectangle of the bedroom door, a faint glow from the digital clock. He swung his legs off the bed and stood. Then the pain came. Not the low, uncertain ache of the past weeks. Not something debatable. It hit sharp and deep enough to bend him before he understood he was bending. He caught himself on the edge of the dresser, breath stopping halfway up his chest. For a second, he thought the room had narrowed, that the oxygen had gone mean. He stayed that way until the worst of the pain loosened enough for him to move. Then he made it to the bathroom in 2 careful stages, one hand on the wall. Under the bright light, everything became uglier. More blood this time. Not a streak a man could fold away into a story. Not something he could argue down by adjusting the language. The sight of it drained the remaining warmth from the evening so completely that the restaurant might have happened to someone else. Len sat down hard on the closed toilet lid. The tiles were cold under his bare feet. The bathroom smelled faintly of soap and old towels, and the metallic edge of fear he would never have admitted was real until it had already entered the room. He waited, counted his breaths without meaning to. One hand stayed pressed against the sink cabinet beside him. The pain eased, then pulsed again lower and duller, as if reminding him it had not gone anywhere. Call someone, he thought. The thought arrived with such clarity it might as well have been spoken aloud. Ellen's name came first because of course it did. Ellen, who kept her phone on loud at night because clients were unpredictable, and because motherhood had changed her sleep permanently even after the marriage ended and the children grew old enough not to need that vigilance. She would answer on the second ring, maybe the first. She would be in the car before he had found all the words. He pictured it too quickly. Headlights in the driveway, her knocking hard, her face taking in the bathroom, the blood, him on the floor or near enough to it. Her fear having a clean target at last. No, the refusal rose faster than reason. Not because he wanted to protect her, not only that, because calling would turn this from a private collapse into an event with witnesses. It would place him inside the very sequence he had been postponing. Concern, intervention, paperwork, names. He did not move. After another minute, the pain shifted enough that he slid carefully down from the toilet lid to the floor. Not on purpose at first. His legs simply did not trust standing yet. The bath mat bunched under one knee. He put a hand on the porcelain base of the tub to steady himself and stayed there, seated on the cool tile, shoulder against the vanity. The position was humiliating and, for the moment, easier. He reached once toward his phone, which lay in the bedroom on the nightstand. Too far. He could have gone to get it, he knew that. But the space between bathroom and bedroom suddenly felt as long and exposed as a parking lot. He imagined himself halfway there, dizzy, foolish, one hand dragging along the wall. So he stayed where he was. The night around the house remained indifferent. The air vent rattled once. A car passed somewhere beyond the subdivision. The clock in the bedroom went on changing numbers, whether he could see it or not. Len sat on the bathroom floor with one hand gripping the side of the tub and did not call anyone. By morning, the pain had settled back into a heavy tenderness that let him stand, wash his face, and move through the house with deliberate care. The light outside was hard already, flattening the yard into its usual Tucson geometry. When he opened the front door to get the mail, a white envelope sat on top of the grocery circulars and a coupon packet. Second notice. Desert Valley Internal Medicine. He stood on the porch in his t-shirt and slippers, the mail loose in one hand, and looked at the words long enough for the sun to start warming the back of his neck. Paperwork, parking lot, and shame. The phone rang while Len was standing at the kitchen counter with the second notice still open in front of him. He looked at the screen and saw the local number he had started recognizing before he consciously admitted he recognized it. Desert Valley Internal Medicine. Though, of course, the name itself did not appear, just digits, neutral digits. The kind that could belong to a dry cleaner or a roofing company or a woman at a front desk about to turn the rest of your week into sequence and time. The ringing went on. Len had slept badly after the night on the bathroom floor. Not fully badly, because truly bad sleep had a certain totality to it, and this had been more broken than absent. He had drifted in and out after dawn, with a damp washcloth on the back of his neck, and woken again with the taste of metal still in his mouth, though there had been no metal there. His back ached from the tile. His legs felt hollow. The envelope on the counter had waited for him when he came into the kitchen like an object with its own patient intention. Second notice. The phone kept ringing. He answered before he could think of a cleaner reason not to. Hello? Good morning. May I speak with Leonard Mercer? The woman's voice was pleasant in the way institutional voices were pleasant. Practiced. Level, patient, without warmth. Not unkind. Just untouched by the meaning of the call. This is Len. Hi, Mr. Mercer. This is Tasha calling from Desert Valley Internal Medicine. I'm following up because we've been trying to reach you regarding your annual wellness visit, and I wanted to see if you'd like to get that scheduled. Len looked at the second notice on the counter. A coffee ring had already marked the corner. I got the letter. All right, we can take care of that now if you have a minute. Take care of that. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the phrase made it sound like renewing a car registration. He moved the letter with one finger, flattening it. I suppose? Perfect. There was the crisp sound of typing on the other end. Let me just pull up your chart. Chart. Len looked out through the sliding glass door at the backyard. Full Tucson morning now. The wall bright, the gravel washed pale, a mockingbird doing something noisy and entitled from the top of the neighbor's fence. I'm due for a screening too, the woman said, still typing. I see one note here. Len's grip tightened on the phone. A screening for what? There was a tiny pause, not because she was alarmed, only because she was reading. Looks like preventive follow-up was recommended at your age range, and of course the provider can go over anything else at your visit. Preventive follow-up. Provider. Visit. Every word belonged to a machine built to make fear sound orderly. Earliest we have with Dr. Patel is next Thursday at 10:40 a.m., she said. Would that work for you? Next Thursday. A date. A time. Something already beginning to form around him. Len swallowed. Morning? Yes, sir. We also have a 2:15 the following Monday. No. The answer came too fast. He softened it a fraction. Thursday's fine. Great. I'll get you in for Thursday, 10:40. Please arrive 15 minutes early for paperwork if anything's changed with insurance or medications. Paperwork. There it was. Another of the words he hated. Not because it frightened him on its own. Because it implied staying. Waiting. Signing his name into something. All right, he said. I can also send a reminder text if that's easiest. Len stared at the toaster without seeing it. Sure. And just to confirm, your cell ends in 2147? Yes. Perfect. You're all set, Mr. Mercer. If anything changes before then, just give us a call. And if you're having any urgent symptoms, of course don't wait for the appointment. Go to urgent care or the ER. The sentence was delivered in one smooth, memorized piece. Urgent symptoms. ER. A whole category of escalation tucked into the call like a folded insert. Len heard himself say, right. Okay, we'll see you Thursday. Then she was gone. The kitchen went quiet so abruptly it felt staged. Refrigerator hum. The faint whir of the ceiling fan over the breakfast nook. Outside, the mockingbird still going on as if some territorial matter had not yet been adequately settled. Len lowered the phone and looked at the counter. 40 a.m. He said it once under his breath, not to remember it, but because it already sounded like something that belonged to another man. The kind of man who went places because someone on the phone told him to arrive 15 minutes early. He wanted coffee and couldn't quite bear the idea of drinking it. He made it anyway. Routine as ballast. He spooned grounds into the machine, filled the reservoir, pressed the button. By the time it started dripping, his shirt was damp between the shoulder blades, though the house was cool. He stood there until the first text came through. Desert Valley Internal Medicine appointment confirmed for 10:40 a.m. Reply C to confirm or call. Len read it, then set the phone face down on the counter. For the rest of the morning, he moved through the house as if nothing substantial had happened, which required more effort than if he had simply admitted otherwise. He paid the electric bill online. He gathered the junk mail into a stack and tied old newspapers with twine for recycling. He opened the drawer in the den, checked his insurance card, and put it in his wallet. The smallest bureaucratic acts felt like complicity. Around noon, he decided to go out. Not because he needed anything urgent, because staying in the house with Thursday now fixed in place had made every room feel slightly rearranged. He told himself he needed stamps. There was a water bill he still liked mailing the old-fashioned way, because the stamped envelope made the payment feel complete in a way clicking a button did not. He could go to the post office, then maybe Jensen's for a new pack of screws he probably did not need yet for the loose hinge on the side gate. Normal errands, public, ordinary adult. He dressed more carefully than necessary, fresh polo, khakis, belt, shoes instead of slippers. He shaved again, though he had shaved the night before. In the bathroom mirror, he looked pale around the mouth. You're going to the post office, he muttered to his own reflection. The voice sounded thin in the tiled room. The post office on Speedway was busy in the usual low-grade way. People standing in lines under fluorescent lights, while the wall clock seemed to move at an insulting speed. Len stood behind a woman mailing 2 padded envelopes and a younger man in work boots shifting from foot to foot with a box under one arm. A child somewhere near the P.O. boxes was asking, for the 5th or 15th time, whether they were done yet. Len kept one hand in his pocket around the insurance card, though he had no reason to be touching it now. The card's plastic edge pressed against his knuckles like a reminder that administrative things could live in your wallet long before they lived in your mouth. By the time he got back to the car, the noon heat had deepened. He sat a moment with the air conditioning blowing too high at his face, then drove to Jensen's almost out of stubbornness. He had said to himself he was doing 2 errands, he would do 2 errands. Inside the hardware store, the cool air smelled of lumber, rubber, fertilizer, and something metallic from the plumbing aisle. It steadied him for a while. He found the screws, wandered through outdoor lighting, picked up a tube of wood glue. The ordinary clutter of the place worked on him the way it usually did. Choice, tasks, fixable things. At checkout, the young cashier asked if he wanted a receipt in the bag. Len said yes. His voice sounded normal enough that he almost believed in the disguise again. Outside, the parking lot was white and glaring. Afternoon had flattened everything into heat and reflected brightness. Len unlocked the trunk, set the bag inside, and then bent to move an old windshield sunshade that had slid down onto the trunk floor. That was when the lightheadedness came. Not the brief sway he had been able to hide at Jensen's last week. This one hit with a sudden, hollow drop from chest to knees, as if some central support had been pulled out of him. The world thinned and brightened at the edges. He straightened too fast and caught himself against the trunk lid with one hand. For a second, he knew with complete bodily certainty that if he tried to walk, he might not do it cleanly. He stood very still. Someone said, "Sir?" A man was standing a few spaces over beside a silver SUV, maybe late 30s, maybe 40. Ball cap, sunglasses, a toddler seat visible through the back window. He had one hand on a case of bottled water and had stopped halfway through lifting it out. "You okay?" The question was ordinary, concerned in a stranger's practical register. But what Len heard in it was worse than alarm. "Sir, you okay?" Not man to man, not neighborly exactly. The phrasing people used when they had already moved you, in their minds, into a category requiring accommodation. "I'm fine," Len said. The man hesitated. "You sure?" Len straightened off the trunk, trying for steadiness and landing somewhere closer to stiffness. Bent too fast. "All right," the stranger did not move away immediately. "Need me to get somebody?" "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "No." The man lifted his free hand an inch in a placating gesture. "Okay, just checking." Len nodded once without looking directly at him. By the time the man turned back to his own car, shame had arrived full and hot, more intense than the dizziness itself. Not because anything dramatic had happened, because it had happened in that small public way, under a sun too bright to hide in front of a stranger whose only impression of him would now be an older man gripping a trunk like he might slide to the pavement. He shut the trunk carefully, got into the car, and sat with both hands on the wheel until his pulse slowed enough that the buzzing in his ears faded. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Ellen. He stared at the name for 2 rings before answering. "Hi." "Hi, you sound weird." "Hello to you too." "You do, where are you?" "In the car." "That narrows the world down beautifully." He closed his eyes. "Jensen's." "Buying what?" "Screws." There was the brief silence of her absorbing that and deciding it was plausible. "Okay, I'm near your place." "Why?" "I was dropping something for a client and thought I'd stop by with that soup container you left in my car." Len opened his eyes. The parking lot shimmered beyond the windshield. "You don't have to. I'm already basically there. I'm out." "I know, that's why I said I'm near your place." Her voice shifted slightly. "Dad, are you okay?" He hated how quickly the question now reached for him from all sides. Martin. A stranger in a parking lot. Ellen. "I'm fine." She did not answer right away, which meant she did not believe him. "I'll stop by later," she said. "There's no need." "Okay," she said, in the tone that meant she was ignoring him with intent. "Text me when you get home." He almost said no to that on principle and instead, "Fine." He hung up and stayed where he was another full minute before starting the car. The drive home felt longer than it should have. At a red light, he was suddenly aware of how many public places required small performances of competence. Turning the wheel, braking at the right distance, looking like a person who belonged unsupervised in motion. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the dizziness had largely passed, but the shame had not. It came inside with him. He put the bag from Jensen's on the kitchen counter and stood there staring at it as if he had forgotten what store-bought things were for. Then there was the knock. Not loud, not hesitant either. Len stayed still a beat too long before opening the door. Ellen stood on the porch with a glass food container in one hand and her car keys in the other. She had changed since work into jeans and a soft gray t-shirt, but her face had the same alertness it always did when she arrived, half convinced something would need managing. "You got home," she said. "That was the plan." She stepped in. Her eyes went to his face immediately, then lower, taking in something he did not know how to disguise because he no longer knew what exactly it was. Pallor, tightness, the particular over-careful way he was standing. "I brought your container," she said, though the sentence clearly no longer mattered. Heroic. "Dad?" He took the container and set it on the counter. "You want coffee?" "No." He nodded as though that settled something. Ellen stood there a second longer. "Were you dizzy?" He turned toward the sink. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you sound like you were." "That's not a real diagnostic tool. Neither is pretending you're joking." He reached for the faucet, then stopped. His hand on the counter looked older than it had a month ago. That irritated him irrationally. Hands were not supposed to betray you in their own shape. "I had a moment," he said. Her face changed at once. Not dramatically. It just lost whatever fragile hope had still been covering it. A moment doing what? At the store. What kind of moment? He turned. "Why is every question a deposition with you?" "Because every answer with you is half a sentence and a closed door." The words came fast, but her voice stayed controlled. That was the worst version. Ellen Loud would at least have sounded young. Ellen Careful sounded like adulthood stepping in. Len looked away first. That was enough for her. "You were dizzy," she said. He shrugged one shoulder, and it passed. "In the store? Parking lot. Did you almost fall?" "No." The pause before the answer had been too long. Ellen took one step closer. "Did somebody help you?" "No." "Did somebody ask if you were okay?" He said nothing. She closed her eyes once, brief and furious, then opened them. Jesus Christ. It was nothing. Her laugh this time was small and unbelieving. "You don't get to keep saying that." He felt the anger rise, not because she was wrong, but because she was standing where the truth had no more room to stay blurred. "I already made the appointment." The sentence came out sharper than intended, thrown like an object. Ellen blinked. "What?" "I made it." "When?" "This morning." "With the clinic?" "Yes, with the clinic." She stared at him, recalculating. "You actually have an appointment?" "Apparently." "When?" "Thursday." "What time?" 10:40. The specificity of it changed her face again. The alarm did not leave, but it took on structure. "Thursday. 10:40. Something real enough to lean against and fear at the same time. She let out a breath. "Okay." Len nodded, though he did not know what he was nodding to. "Okay," she said again, more quietly. "That's good." He wanted to agree. Instead, he said, "You don't have to act like I've finally joined civilization." "That's not what I'm doing." "It sounds like it." Ellen's mouth tightened. "I'm trying very hard not to say the thing I want to say." "Then maybe don't." She looked at him a long moment. "Did you drive home after that happened?" He did not answer fast enough. "Dad?" "Yes." "By yourself?" "Yes." "Without calling anyone?" "Yes." The kitchen seemed suddenly too bright. Late light had shifted across the floor and was climbing the lower cabinets. The bag of screws sat between them on the counter, like proof of a day he had tried to keep ordinary and failed. Ellen took another breath, this one less controlled. This is not nothing anymore. There was no polish in the line, no speech, just a daughter arriving at the place where her fear no longer needed permission from him. Len looked at her and saw, with a kind of exhausted resentment, that she had finally seen him without his cooperation. Not imagined him ill, not suspected, seen enough. He looked away. "I know what day it is," he said. "That's not what I meant." "I know." Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. Then Ellen said, more carefully, "I'm taking you." His head came up. "No." "Yes." "No." It wasn't a question. "It's my appointment. And your body, apparently, is trying very hard to make sure we stop pretending about that." He flinched slightly at "we," though he could not have said why. Maybe because it was accurate. "I can drive myself," he said. Ellen studied him, then nodded once in a way that did not concede anything. "We'll talk about that." He almost snapped back. Instead, he just stood there, tired all the way into his back teeth. A few minutes later, she left only because staying would have meant another fight neither of them had the energy to finish. At the door, she said, "Text me tonight." Not a request, not a command exactly, just a line laid down. After her car pulled away, Len stayed in the kitchen a while, then carried the bag from Jensen's to the hall table without unpacking it. He picked up his wallet, checked again that the insurance card was inside, then set the wallet down. Twilight settled outside, the house cooled a little. At some point, he went out to the car, though he did not need anything from it. He sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, one hand resting on the wheel, The appointment time alive somewhere just behind his eyes. 40. The house stood quiet in front of him, porch light off, blinds half drawn. He could have gotten out immediately. Instead, he sat there for a long time, looking at his own dark reflection in the windshield, as if going inside would mean admitting the day had finished in a shape he had not chosen, the room he couldn't enter. Len got to the clinic 12 minutes early and sat in the car with both hands on the wheel as if he were still driving. The building was smaller than he remembered from the outside and more unforgiving from this close. Beige stucco, dark windows, a row of trimmed shrubs trying to soften the place and failing. Above the entrance, the sign for Desert Valley Internal Medicine looked too calm for what the building was for. A couple in their 60s walked in together while he watched, the woman carrying a purse and a folder, the man holding nothing at all. A younger woman in scrubs came out with a paper cup, squinted into the light, and went back inside. Len checked the clock on the dashboard. 10:28. He had driven himself despite Ellen's clear intention to prevent that. Last night he had answered her last text with a flat, "I'll be fine," and then turned the phone face down before she could reply. She had sent one more message anyway. "Text me when you get there." He had not done that either. On the passenger seat sat his wallet, insurance card tucked inside, and the folded appointment reminder he had printed from the clinic text because somehow a piece of paper made the thing feel both more official and more manageable. The paper lay there like proof he had agreed to participate. He should go in. He knew that. The morning had been built around it from the moment he woke. Shower, shave, clean shirt, coffee, he barely touched. The drive across town with the radio off because noise had felt like interference. He had done everything a man did when he intended to follow through. Still, he sat. In the windshield, his own reflection hovered faintly over the entrance, older than he felt in his head. Thinner, too, though maybe that was just the light. The parking lot glare flattened everybody into something slightly washed out. A pickup truck pulled into a space 2 rows over. A woman got out, checked her phone, and crossed quickly toward the door without looking around, as if momentum itself were a form of courage. Len thought of June with sudden irritation, not because she had done anything wrong, because if she had been alive, he would already be inside. She would have parked, shut off the engine, picked up her bag, and said something ordinary in that brisk, domestic tone of hers that treated dread as one more errand to move through. "Just go get it checked, Len." Nothing deep, nothing theatrical. Just the sentence she used whenever he tried to wait out a cough or a sore knee, or the strange shoulder pain that had turned out to be nothing 15 years ago. She had never romanticized avoidance. That had been one of the things he loved and sometimes resented about her. She believed in sequence, in doing the next required thing before fear had time to decorate it. He looked at the clock again. 10:31. He reached for the door handle, then stopped, hand still on it, because the thought arrived whole and ugly. What if this is the last morning I still get to be a man driving himself to a doctor instead of a man with results? Not diagnosis even. Not yet. Just results. Follow-up. More phone calls. The administrative creep of illness taking over the edges of the week. He pictured the den drawer full of insurance papers. He pictured Ellen's face shifting from worried to organized. He pictured Martin looking at him without surprise. He pictured his own calendar filling with appointments until the calendar itself no longer belonged to life but to the maintenance of whatever was replacing it. The door handle felt hot under his hand. A car alarm chirped somewhere behind him. Somebody laughed in the parking lot. The world remained offensively normal. Len got out. The heat hit him at once, though it was not yet noon. Tucson light had that hard early quality, already bright enough to erase mercy from surfaces. He locked the car, slipped the appointment paper into his pocket, and walked toward the entrance. Automatic doors, cooler air, a smell of disinfectant and machine coffee, and something sweet from a plug-in air freshener near the front desk that only made the place seem more medical. The waiting room was larger than it looked from outside, but not by much. Beige chairs arranged in rows, a television mounted in one corner with closed captions running beneath a home renovation show. Nobody seemed to be watching. Fake plants, a side table stacked with old magazines and newer pamphlets about healthy aging, vaccines, blood pressure. He gave his name at the desk. The receptionist was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a voice so even it almost seemed automated. She smiled professionally, asked for his insurance card, slid a clipboard toward him. "Just verify your address and emergency contact, please." Emergency contact. Len stared down at the form. Ellen Mercer. The line had her number written from some previous visit. Still accurate, still waiting there, as if the system had always known what he was trying not to know. He filled out the page, his handwriting less steady than he liked, and handed it back. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Have a seat and they'll call you shortly." Shortly. He sat in the second row near the wall, not close enough to the television to hear it properly, not far enough to forget it was there. A man in a baseball cap coughed into his fist 3 seats down. An older woman with a cane sat beside what looked like her daughter, both of them silent in the practiced way of people who had already been to many such places together. Near the window, a white-haired man in a veteran's cap read the same page of a hunting magazine for 10 full minutes without turning it. Len rested his hands on his knees. The chair was too soft in the wrong places. His body did not settle into it. It negotiated. The air conditioning raised a faint chill along his forearms. Somewhere deeper in the office, a printer started up, spat out several sheets, then stopped. The television captions moved through words like transformation and updated kitchen, while the people in the room waited to be called into smaller rooms where other words lived. "Mr. Donnelly?" A nurse appeared at the side door, smiling the public smile of someone who did this all day. A man rose, moved after her, disappeared. Len looked at the other seated people. He did not think sick exactly. The room was too ordinary for that word. What he thought was something worse. Life after naming. These people had crossed some threshold, whether today or years ago. Their bodies were no longer private negotiations. They existed in charts, in appointment intervals, in phrases like follow-up in 6 months, and we'll monitor that. Even the ones here for routine things had agreed to a system that turned uncertainty into procedure. That was what began to undo him. Not fear of one catastrophic sentence, fear of the whole quieter life after the sentence, whatever it was. "Mrs. Salazar?" The woman with the cane stood with effort. Her daughter rose too, automatically reaching for the purse and the folder. The motion was so practiced it might have been choreography learned over time. Len looked away. On the table beside him lay a pamphlet titled, "Living Well with Chronic Conditions." The phrase made something in him go cold. Living well. As if life could be reclassified and handed back with a new instruction sheet. He became suddenly painfully aware of how the past weeks had already changed the shape of his days. The notepad, the alarms in the night, the way grocery shopping had turned into a calculation. The way Ellen's voice had sharpened. Martin's words had taken root. The clinic had entered his phone as a recurring presence. He had told himself he was preserving ordinary life by delaying all this. But ordinary life was already gone. He heard a nurse call another name and did not catch it. His mouth had gone dry. He could taste coffee from that morning, sour and stale now. He bent slightly forward, elbows on knees, not because he needed to, but because the room suddenly seemed arranged around other people's endurance, and he did not know whether he belonged among them or outside them. The side door opened again. "Mr. Mercer?" He knew it was his name before the syllables fully reached him. The nurse stood there, holding a tablet, maybe 30, ponytail, sensible shoes, a face composed into the bright neutrality of the profession. Not rude, not warm, ready. Len looked at her, then down at his hands. The nurse waited a beat. "Mr. Mercer?" He stood up. For one strange second, he thought he might do it. That standing was the whole battle, and the rest would follow as matter of course. One foot in front of the other. Walk through the side door. Blood pressure. Questions. A paper sheet over the exam table, making that dry crackle sound when he sat down. It all seemed possible in outline. Then he looked past the nurse, through the brief gap of the open door, and saw the hallway behind her. Beige walls, closed doors, a scale in an alcove. A blood pressure machine rolled against the baseboard. The private machinery of being processed. Something in him recoiled so completely it felt physical. "Mr. Mercer," the nurse said again, gentler now, because gentleness belonged to people they believed might need coaxing. Len heard himself say, "Bathroom," and touched 2 fingers briefly toward the hall outside the waiting room, as if asking pardon for something small. "Of course," the nurse said. "Just let us know when you're back." He nodded. Then he walked not toward the hallway behind her, but toward the front of the clinic, past the magazine table, past the reception desk where the woman on the glasses chain was on the phone, smiling into routine. The automatic doors parted. Heat struck him full in the face. By the time he reached the parking lot, his pulse had climbed high enough that the edges of the morning looked a little too sharp. He kept walking until he got to his car, opened the door, got in, shut it, and sat with both hands flat on the wheel. He had left. Not postponed in theory, not delayed by paperwork, left. The fact of it sat in the car with him, enormous and absurd. He started the engine and pulled out before anyone from the clinic could come looking, though he knew they would not. People probably left all the time, or maybe they didn't. Maybe he was singularly ridiculous in ways no chart could record. He drove without deciding where to go. South first, then west, then into a grocery store parking lot he had no reason to enter. He sat there for 5 minutes behind a minivan with a cracked rear wiper and watched people go in and out carrying the afternoon on their faces. Then he drove again. A gas station, a pharmacy, another light, another left turn. He spent 40 minutes making a map of Avoidance across Tucson. At one point, he found himself in the lot of a park near Reed. He parked beneath a Palo Verde tree that cast thin, uncertain shade over the hood and turned off the engine. In the distance, children were shouting near a playground. A dog barked twice and was answered by another farther away. Len sat in the stillness and looked at his hands. They were the same hands. That was what unsettled him most. Nothing outward had changed since 10:39. No diagnosis had entered him. No doctor had said a word. Yet the morning had cut something loose. He had thought the threshold was the room, the exam, the tests, the results. But the real threshold had been simpler and uglier. The moment his own fear proved stronger than his own plan. He drove home around noon. The house met him with its familiar quiet, but not comfort. He set his keys in the bowl, then stood in the kitchen without taking off his shoes. The calendar hung by the pantry door. A plain monthly one Ellen had mailed him last Christmas with desert wildflowers printed at the top and large enough squares for appointments he never meant to have. He walked over to it. The last 3 weeks looked wrong all at once. Not because he had written much there, just dinner with Ellen, coffee with Martin, 1040 Dr. Patel in today's square, but because everything unmarked now seemed to carry invisible notes. Bathroom, notepad. Search terms at midnight. Second notice. The hardware store. The floor. The waiting room. His days had become organized around his body long before anyone named what the body was doing. He had not been protecting his life from illness. He had been shrinking life around illness without the dignity of admitting it. His phone rang. Ellen. The name on the screen made his stomach drop more cleanly than the waiting room had. He knew why she was calling. Because it was after 11:30. Because she had counted the drive there, the check-in, the probable wait. Because she had given him room and the room had run out. He answered. Hi, he said. How did it go? Her voice was careful, too careful. Len looked at the calendar, at today's square. At his own handwriting there, dry and stupidly ordinary. It was fine, he said. The lie entered the kitchen and stood there. There was a pause on the line, not long, but long enough. What did they say? Ellen asked. They want to do some follow-up. It came out clumsy, assembled from borrowed language. He hated himself the moment he said it. Follow-up for what? Nothing decided yet. Another pause. He could hear some office noise around her, muffled talking, a printer, the little acoustics of adulthood continuing elsewhere while he stood in his kitchen inventing sentences. Okay, she said. Did they give you another appointment? Not yet. All right. Her voice had changed a little, not convinced, trying to stay steady with something that did not sit right. Do you want me to come by later? No, Dad. I'm tired, that's all. Okay. Not agreement, storage. She was storing this for later. Eat something. I will. Text me if anything changes. Sure. They hung up. Len kept the phone in his hand long after the call ended. The lie was not large. That was what made it unbearable. If he had said he got terrible news, that would at least have belonged to drama. This was smaller, meaner. A practical lie thrown into a practical relationship. A daughter asking how it went. A father refusing the simplest truth. He set the phone on the counter and immediately picked it up again. No. He put it down, walked to the sink, ran water he did not need, shut it off. The house seemed charged now, as if the kitchen itself had hurt him and would not absorb it. On the counter by the fruit bowl lay the appointment printout he had left before going in. Thursday, 10:40. Proof of intention. Proof of failure, too, now. He looked toward the hallway, toward the den, toward the bedroom, as if one room in the house might contain the version of him that still made sense. None did. June's voice came back to him then. Not from any specific memory, but from 100 ordinary ones layered together. Irritation softened by habit, practical faith and sequence. Just go get it checked. He sat down hard at the kitchen table. For a while he stared at nothing, then at the calendar again, then at his phone. What frightened him now was not only what the doctor might find, it was the scale of what fear had already taken. Mornings, meals, grocery aisles, Ellen's trust, Martin's patience, sleep, the ability to sit in a room for 10 minutes and remain a person instead of a nervous system waiting for instructions. He had left the clinic before anyone could say a word, and still the fear had managed to occupy everything. That was the part he could no longer make small. He picked up the phone and opened his messages. Ellen's last thread sat there, a line of practical concern, running back days. Text me when you get there. Did you make it home? Thursday, right? His thumbs hovered over the keyboard. He erased the first attempt, then typed again. Can you take me tomorrow? He read the words once before sending them. Then he hit send and sat there in the kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum and the faint rush of traffic somewhere beyond the subdivision, while the message left his phone and went where it had to go. What the not knowing took. Ellen drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. That was the first thing Len noticed after they pulled away from his house. No music, no morning host filling the car with weather and traffic and false energy. Just the low hum of the air conditioning and the soft rattle of something in the passenger side door when they hit a seam in the road. He sat beside her with his wallet in one hand and his insurance card tucked inside it like a small official threat. He had put on a clean blue shirt, shaved carefully, and tied his shoes instead of slipping them on. The effort had not made him feel prepared, only more aware that preparation had become one of the costumes Fear liked to wear. Outside the windshield, Tucson moved past in its usual, washed-out morning clarity. Gravel yards, low walls, the pale shimmer of heat already beginning to gather above the roads, though it was not yet noon. The mountains sat far off and colorless, like something printed too faintly into the background. Ellen had come early and not commented on the fact that he was already dressed. She had just knocked, waited, and when he opened the door, she said, "You ready?" in the same tone she might have used if they were going to the bank. Now she glanced at him only briefly at stoplights, never long enough to make him feel watched. It was a kindness he noticed because she had stopped trying to hide that she was worried. The kindness was in not turning the whole drive into worry's performance. "You eat anything?" she asked finally. "Toast? And?" "Coffee." She gave a small breath through her nose. Not approval, not disapproval either. Just the acknowledgement of a familiar disappointment. "There's a granola bar in my bag," she said. "I'm not 7. I know, that's why I didn't open it for you." Len looked out the window. The corner of his mouth twitched despite himself. Not a smile exactly. Enough to release something small in the car. After a minute, Ellen said, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." "That's generous. I'm trying to keep you in the vehicle." He nodded once. She did not say anything after that. The clinic came into view too fast. Same beige building, same dark windows, same small patch of landscaped shrubs that tried and failed to soften what the place was. Len felt his body register it before his thoughts did. The tightening through the stomach, the thinness in the mouth, the way his hands adjusted their grip on the wallet. Ellen pulled into a space near the entrance and turned off the engine. This was the part where, yesterday, he had still believed he could control the story by stepping out of it. Today, the story had followed him here in another shape. Not as Private Dread this time, but as his daughter in the driver's seat, his appointment in the system, his symptoms finally spoken aloud to another human being who had typed them down without surprise. Ellen unbuckled first, then she looked at him. "I'm going in with you," she said. It was not a challenge, not a plea, just a fact set down between them. Len nodded. He saw that surprise her a little, though she did not show much of it. Inside, the air conditioning struck cold across his face and forearms. The clinic smelled the same as yesterday. Coffee burned too long on a hot plate somewhere. Disinfectant. Paper. A faint citrus cleaner trying to pass for freshness. At the front desk, a receptionist with dark hair clipped back from her face gave them the same mild, professional smile she would have given anyone. "Name?" "Leonard Mercer." She found him quickly. "An appointment with Dr. Patel. Perfect. I'll just need you to verify a couple of things." The clipboard came, the pen, address, date of birth, emergency contact. Ellen Mercer. Her name looked steadier on paper than it had in his mouth these past weeks. He handed the clipboard back. The receptionist glanced over it and nodded. "You're all set. Have a seat. They'll call you shortly." This time, Ellen sat beside him, not across from him, in the waiting room. The television on the wall was tuned to a daytime home show, with the sound off and captions on. A man in a baseball cap coughed into his fist near the windows. An older woman in a blouse, buttoned wrong at the collar, stared down at a magazine without turning the page. Somebody in the hallway laughed once, then lowered their voice. Len kept his hands on his knees. The waiting room still looked like the place Fear became administrative. Pamphlets about blood pressure, balance, colon screening, a fake ficus in a brass-colored pot, a side table with old magazines, and a bowl of peppermints nobody touched. Yesterday, he had looked at all that and seen a life after diagnosis swallowing everything ahead of it. Today, sitting with Ellen beside him, He could feel the same fear rising, but altered by shame. Not because he was here, because he had already been here once and left, because he had lied about it afterward, because the thing he had spent so much energy trying to preserve, his image of himself as a man still in command of his own life, had been broken most cleanly not by illness but by the sight of himself running from a waiting room. Mr. Mercer? The nurse stood by the side door holding a tablet, her expression open and neutral. Len stood. He felt Ellen rise with him, and that small shared motion was enough to carry him forward. The exam room was the same kind of room as any other. Paper-covered table, sink, glove box on the wall, a rolling stool, a poster of the digestive system that he avoided looking at too directly. The nurse took his blood pressure, asked the questions again in brisk sequence, entered the answers into the tablet. Any blood in the stool? Yes. How long? A few weeks. Dizziness? Yes. Any fainting? No. The nurse nodded, typed, moved on. Nothing in her face suggested catastrophe. That should have comforted him. Instead, it made him feel almost foolish, sitting there with his shirt cuff slightly unbuttoned from the blood pressure reading, as if he had spent a month living beside a cliff that turned out to be an office hallway. After she left, Ellen took the chair by the wall. Len sat on the edge of the exam table, paper crackling under him each time he shifted. The room felt too bright for thought. He kept looking at the sink because it was plain and did not ask anything. "You can tell him about the other night," Ellen said quietly. Len did not look at her. "I know. You don't have to leave parts out." He gave a small, humorless sound. "That's become a theme." Ellen was silent for a second. "Yeah," she said. "It has." There was no sting in it, which somehow made it sting more. A knock came, then the doctor entered. Dr. Patel was smaller than Len had pictured him from the name. Early 50s maybe, trim, rectangular glasses, dark hair, graying at the temples. He carried a tablet and wore the calm expression of someone who had spent years practicing the art of being direct without sounding abrupt. "Mr. Mercer," he said, shaking Len's hand, "I'm Dr. Patel. Good to meet you." He nodded to Ellen as well, then took the stool near the counter and sat. "I've read the intake note," he said, "but I'd like to hear in your own words what's been happening." So Len told him. Not neatly, not in one clean narrative. The words came in pieces, and Dr. Patel helped place them in order with questions. Blood in the stool for several weeks, pain, low and on and off. Lightheadedness, worse lately. Eating less. One rough night on the bathroom floor he should have called someone about, and didn't. Last colonoscopy too long ago. No fever. Some weight loss, maybe. Enough that his daughter noticed. Dr. Patel asked questions without changing his tone. When he examined Len, his hands were cool and practiced. Pressure here, tenderness there. Breathe in, breathe out. Lie back, sit up. Len obeyed. What he feared, some melodramatic unveiling, never came. Dr. Patel did not pause for effect. He did not fold his hands and tell Len to brace himself. He looked at the notes, looked at Len, and spoke in the same measured voice he had used from the moment he entered. "There is clearly something going on that we need to work up promptly," he said. "Blood in the stool and the weight loss are not things I want you waiting on any longer. That said, there are several possible causes, and we do not know enough today to jump to the worst conclusion." Promptly, possible causes, not enough today. The words did not erase fear. They did something stranger. They took fear out of the realm of imagination and placed it into sequence. Dr. Patel continued, "I want blood work today. I'm also putting in an urgent referral to GI and ordering imaging. If symptoms worsen significantly, heavy bleeding, severe pain, fainting, you don't wait for a follow-up. You go in." Ellen asked practical questions from the chair. How soon for the GI referral? Whether the imaging would be scheduled through the clinic or separately? What counted as heavy bleeding? Dr. Patel answered each one without fuss. No stage, no sentence, no instant collapse of life into before and after. Just a problem with procedures attached to it. Len listened, and something in him shifted in a way he had not anticipated. He had spent weeks behaving like a man already living under final news, watching grocery dates like omens, treating every quiet morning as a temporary stay, hoarding normal life by refusing to step toward information. But sitting here, hearing a doctor calmly say, "We need to work this up promptly," he felt the scale of what he had already handed over. Not years, not even months maybe, but real time. Real mornings, real meals. Time with Ellen bent into suspicion. Time with Martin bent into anger. Time inside his own house thinned by dread, until even the kitchen had ceased to feel like a place to live and become a checkpoint for symptoms. He had not been sparing himself. He had been spending himself badly. When the visit ended, Dr. Patel shook his hand again and said, We'll get moving on this. Len nodded. After the doctor left, the room went briefly quiet except for the air vent and the faint movement of people in the hallway. Ellen stood. You okay? The question was simple enough that he could answer honestly. Yes, he said, and then because honesty had become harder to dodge once he had begun it. No, but yes. Ellen did not smile at that. She just nodded once, as if this was the first fully recognizable thing he had said in days. They stopped at the lab on the way out. More forms, a plastic chair, a woman in purple scrubs calling names. A blood draw that lasted less than 5 minutes and left a white square of gauze taped inside his elbow. Everything so procedural, so untheatrical, that it made the last month of his private terror seem both understandable and ridiculous. When they finally came back out into the parking lot, the heat hit hard enough to feel almost solid. Noon sun had turned the car roofs bright as stovetops. The blacktop shimmered. Somewhere farther down the lot, a shopping cart rolled half a foot and stopped. The air smelled of dust and warm engine metal and the faint chemical tang of asphalt cooking under light. Ellen unlocked the car with a beep. Then she stopped when she realized Len had not moved toward the door. He stood beside the passenger side, with one hand resting flat on the hot roof. The heat pressed into his palm immediately. He left it there. Ellen came around the front of the car and stood near him, close enough to hear without leaning in, far enough not to make him feel cornered. For a while, he said nothing. His body felt both lighter and more tired than when they had arrived. The fear was still there. So was the uncertainty. There would be calls now. More appointments, more things entering the calendar. The part of him that hated all that had not vanished in the exam room. But the thing hurting most in that moment was not the doctor's concern. It was the recognition of what he had done to the days before this one. He looked out across the lot instead of at Ellen. I kept thinking, he said, then stopped. The words did not want to come polished. He let them come rough. I kept thinking if I didn't know yet, then maybe I still had time. He heard how small the sentence sounded in the open air. Not profound, just true. Ellen stayed quiet. Len swallowed once. The hot metal under his hand anchored him. Turns out the not knowing was what took it. That was all. No grand speech followed. No apology with structure. Just the sentence sitting there between them. Thinner than all the fear that had built up before it and somehow heavier. Ellen did not rush to fix it. She did not tell him it was okay, or that they still had time, or that none of it was lost. She did not step in with the kind of comfort people offered when they wanted to close the scene before it had fully landed. She only moved a little closer, enough that her shoulder was almost level with his arm. I know, she said. And because she said it that way, not as agreement with his mistakes, but as witness to them, the sentence did not fall into emptiness. Len closed his eyes for a second. The shame did not disappear. The relief did not either. They stayed together in him, awkward and unresolved, like two people forced to share a bench. After a moment, he took his hand off the roof. The skin of his palm tingled from the heat. He opened the passenger door himself and got in. Not like a man escaping, just like a man getting into a car because there were still things left to do, and no useful reason to run from them anymore.